My name is Mira Langford, 30 years old. I didn't expect 30 to feel like a verdict. Evan was already in the kitchen trying to flip pancakes without setting off the smoke alarm, and Noah sprinted in with a crumpled card from school, stick figure capes and dinosaurs, the world as he knows it. I hugged him longer than he understood and let the sugar smell of batter and syrup soften the morning. It was quiet, the way good mornings are quiet when the people in the room actually love you. My phone stayed blank. No calls from my parents. Nothing from my sister, Olivia, who I practically shepherded from freshman year to the apartment she never quite learned to pay for. Evan talked to fill the silence. Weekend plans, the movie Noah wanted to see. I nodded, pretending I wasn't listening for a vibration that never came. After lunch, the pretend cracked. I opened Facebook. The top of my feed was a postcard. Turquoise water, whipped cream clouds, palm trees drawn by a child who never ran out of green. My entire family stood on a beach, tanned and grinning like they'd been airbrushed by joy. Even Uncle Rob had flown in from 6 states away, the man who can't be bothered to return a text unless there's a football score attached. The caption, "A wonderful day for a wonderful family." It had been posted 11 minutes earlier. For a beat, I tried to lie to myself. Maybe it was a memory. Maybe it was last summer, or the one before. Then I saw the timestamp. Fresh. My stomach dropped, but my hands were steady. I typed one word under the photo. Why? I didn't wait long. My dad replied, as if he'd been crouched behind the comment box, breath held for the cue. We didn't want to waste time on a clown. Evan had leaned in to read by then. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I felt the heat rise in my chest and then pass, like a fever that had finally burned through. There it was. No more decoding, no more pretending that cruelty was a misunderstanding. I wrote back, "Surprise waiting for you." Then I set the phone face down, looked at Evan, and smiled in a way that felt almost unfamiliar on my face. It wasn't happiness, it was decision. 2 weeks. That's all it would take for the world to tilt. They had no idea what I'd held up for them, what invisible scaffolding I spent years tightening every time they shook the structure. Olivia's tuition payments, cleared at the last minute so her classes wouldn't drop. Her rent, quietly covered so she could focus. My father's car insurance I paid after he forgot 3 months in a row. My mother's cyclical emergencies, dental work that always seemed to arrive on a 6-month timer, credit cards bloated by impulse and guilt. I had become the family's emergency exit, the door they kicked open whenever their smoke filled the room. On my 30th birthday, watching them toast Tahiti without me, I decided to brick the door. I started with the bank. Tuition. Canceled. The registrar would send Olivia every notice instead of me. Her apartment. Canceled. I called the landlord myself and told him to remove my payment authorization. Utilities tied to my card. Canceled. Internet, electric, water, gas, all the brag-worthy low bills they'd credited to frugal living. Insurance. Canceled. I listened to hold music long enough to learn every note of the elevator saxophone solo. The repetition calmed me. Each click felt like sliding a bolt. Evan watched from the doorway, jaw set, eyes tracing my face. When the last call ended, he walked over, lowered his voice. "Are you sure you want to do it like this?" There was no judgment in it, only a mirror he was holding to be certain I recognized myself. "Yes," I said. The word surprised me by how clean it felt. They made their choice on a beach, I making mine at the kitchen table. The silence of those 2 weeks should have felt like panic. It didn't. They posted more photos, cocktails sweating over sunlit tables, Olivia in a straw hat she couldn't afford, my mother's caption pretending the world had shrunk to the circumference of their laughter. I did not answer the silence with silence. I answered it with groceries, homework, bedtime stories. Noah and I built a blanket fort over the living room, and Evan knelt beside us with a flashlight like a conspirator in joy. I learned what it was to wake without the coil in my stomach that meant someone else's problem had already found me. The first crack came the night they returned. The knock on the front door was not a knock. It was a demand. Evan reached it before I did. He opened it with no smile. My mother swept in like wind entering a room it owned, Olivia at her shoulder, arms crossed, sunburned and brittle. My father lingered on the porch as if indecision could save him. "We need to talk," my mother said. "No," Evan replied, voice even. "You need to listen." I took Noah upstairs, tucked him into his room with a whispered promise of 2 bedtime stories, then walked back down into a storm that had been waiting a decade to break. My father tried to make it soft, talking about community, about bills that must have gotten mixed up, about how family means covering for each other. My mother started the crying she saves for moments she wants to reroute. Olivia called me selfish for abandoning her mid-semester, as if she'd been abandoned on a raft in open water, instead of handed oars for years. Evan didn't yell. He looked at each of them like he was measuring their weight against the door frame. "You bled her dry for years," he said, voice so controlled it felt like a scalpel. "No birthday call, no text, just a postcard to the world that said she wasn't part of you. You don't get to demand the wallet after you cut out the heart." They turned to me. They always do in the final act, when the script needs a rewrite, and for once, I didn't offer one. "Get out," I said. They stared like the word required translation. I stepped forward. "Out." Evan didn't move from the doorway until they crossed it. When the door shut, the windows rattled. In the hush that followed, I recognized the sound of my own breath, like meeting a stranger who looked familiar. The next days choreographed themselves, a text from my father, paragraphs layering sacrifice and injury, a voicemail from my mother, half sobbing, half indicting Evan as the witch who turned me against them, a handful of messages from Olivia, slim and poisonous. "You're ruining my future. You owe me. That gold digger brainwashed you." I didn't answer any of it. Instead, I took Noah to the park. He picked the blue popsicle. Evan pushed him on the swing until his laughter turned the air bright. I realized peace is not the absence of noise. It's the refusal to let certain sounds inside. But ignoring is not surrender. That night, as water ran upstairs, and Noah babbled about bubble beards, the knocking returned, louder, impatient. I opened the door a sliver. The 3 of them stood there looking less like an ocean postcard and more like a storm after landfall. "We need to talk," my father repeated, pushing the door a little wider. "We already did," I said. My mother reached for her handkerchief, the performance cue she'd used since I was little. "We are a family. You're letting him drive a wedge between us." Evan, on the stairs now, didn't dignify it. I leaned into the frame and let the words line up of their own accord. "For years I paid your bills, patched your mistakes, funded Olivia's everything. You barely said thank you. The second I stopped being an ATM, suddenly I'm bewitched. You didn't lose a daughter. You lost a wallet." Something changed in my father's face. Age arriving all at once, like a bill that finally posted. He tried one more line about real men and real families, as if Evan were the problem to solve. Evan laughed once, a quiet exhale that said more than any argument. My mother started a protest, a plea, a half-built bridge. I closed the door. The house settled. We didn't talk, not for a long minute. We just stood in the peace, listening to water upstairs, and our son's voice narrating the progress of a rubber duck. I thought of the comment under the beach photo, "Surprise waiting for you." The surprise was not a tantrum or an explosion. It was the quiet, relentless fact of no. Evan said the second knock would be the last. He was wrong. The morning after I closed the door on them, my phone lit up like a siren. A text from my father arrived first, long and theatrical, paragraphs balancing on the word sacrifice, like it could carry the weight of everything that came next. "We did our best raising you. We weren't perfect, but we don't deserve this." Then a voicemail from my mother, her voice already cracked before the first syllable. She accused Evan of turning me against blood, of controlling the narrative, of isolating me. She asked if Noah even knew his grandparents anymore, if I wanted him to grow up without family. I held the phone away and watched the waveform crawl across the screen like a heart monitor for a life I wasn't living. Olivia's messages were short and hot. "You're ruining my future. You owe me. I can't believe you let that gold digger brainwash you." I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the table. The house exhaled. I tried to work, but focus is a thin thread, and they had been pulling at it for years. Evan brought tea and leaned against the counter, watching me without pressing. "Say it out loud," he said. "Say exactly what you want to happen." I looked past him to the backyard where the maple threw coins of light across the grass. I want the knocking to stop. I want a week without a crisis. I want to only answer for the people who live under this roof. Then we'll practice, he said, like peace could be rehearsed into muscle memory. They didn't text for a day. That's how manipulation behaves. Push, retreat, push harder. Late afternoon, I took Noah to the library and watched him negotiate with a shelf of picture books as if it were a jury. We came home at dusk to a mailbox flag sticking up like an accusation. No return address, just my name in my mother's careful, dramatic cursive. Evan watched me open it at the kitchen counter while Noah narrated the adventures of a cartoon fox. The letter was a full-page soliloquy about forgiveness and blood ties, how a mother's love is unconditional, how misunderstandings become mountains, how bridges can be rebuilt if the wounded one lays down her stones. It ended with a request so brazen I laughed out loud. Would I, as a gesture of goodwill, send Olivia a check for her next semester? Evan's mouth curved, not a smile exactly, more like a recognition of a pattern repeating itself as if that repetition could make it true. He took the page, folded it once, then tore it in half. So clean, the rip sounded like a zipper. He dropped the pieces into the trash with the practiced grace of a man removing a splinter. There, he said softly, one fewer paper cut. That night, as if summoned by the tearing, Olivia called from a blocked number. She launched into a rush-hour apology, words piling on each other like cars that forgot the brakes existed. She was stressed. She didn't mean it. The pressure had been a lot. "You're my big sister," she said, sweetening the register. "We can't let stupid stuff come between us." I let the silence stretch until it made a shape around her words. "Find another idiot to finance your life," I said quietly. "I'm retired." She tried to cry and curse at the same time. I hung up, blocked the second number. The night didn't even notice. 2 days later, my father found me at work. He arrived with the body language of someone who thinks offices are theaters, and he has the starring role. He sat without asking and folded one ankle over his knee, a full tableau of composure he hadn't earned. "I understand why you're upset," he began, lowering his voice like a confidant. "But a real woman doesn't let a man come between her and her blood." For a heartbeat, the old reflex bristled, the desire to justify, to rewind to the moment right before the wound and correct the angle. Then the reflex died. I leaned back in my chair and met his eyes. "You never lost me to Evan," I said. "You lost me all by yourself." He opened his mouth, and I raised a hand. "You didn't raise a daughter. You raised a backup plan, and you stopped pretending I was anything else the day you posted from Tahiti." He tried the script about families fighting and forgiving. I shut the file folder on my desk like I was clicking a lock. Families also stopped taking advantage. I stood and pointed to the door, not angry, just done. He left with one last long look, the kind people give a stranger they think they used to know. Peace moved into the house like a tenant who paid on time and kept the music low. Without their constant emergencies, the room sounded different. The dishwasher's soft click, the wheeze of the hallway vent, the cadence of Noah's feet at bedtime, they became our weather. We put an offer on a house 2 towns over, with a yard big enough to lose and find yourself in, and schools that didn't require apologizing for the past. At night, Evan and I sat at the table plotting a Europe trip we'd delayed every year, because the calendar always bent around somebody else's crisis. The map lay open like a promise. I felt the smallest, strangest thing taking root. I was not bracing anymore. On the 5th day, silence broke where it always does, in the driveway. Evan and I were in the backyard building the skeleton of a treehouse, Noah acting as foreman with a hammer he wasn't allowed to use. Tires screeched out front. I told Noah to stay with his dad and walked around the house with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you're not going to give them what they came for. They were arranged like a photograph, trying too hard to look candid, my mother in an outfit too composed for a confrontation. My father at her shoulder, Olivia vibrating with a performance itch. Beside her stood a narrow man with a clipboard and the powdered confidence of a kiosk salesman. "This is my attorney," Olivia announced, tilting her chin as if the word itself could trespass for her. He cleared his throat and read from the paper like a magician fumbling a reveal. I was in default of familial obligations. If I did not reinstate my financial responsibilities, legal action would follow. I let the silence after his declaration stretch until he could hear it. Then I laughed. Not cruelly, just genuinely, like someone who had finally heard the punchline to a joke that had been bombing for years. I reached into my back pocket and handed him an envelope I'd been carrying since the first knock. Inside were copies of everything: receipts, bank transfers, emails, screenshots, decades of evidence that I had given freely and often, that I had explicitly called each transfer a gift, not a loan. Notes from my mother thanking me for bailing us out again. Texts from Olivia promising to be more responsible. The time-stamped ledgers that make insinuation melt under fluorescent lights. I watched the man's eyebrows migrate north as he flipped pages. Olivia's face went pale under the sunburn. My father's chest puffed in and then stalled, like he'd pulled breath from a place that no longer supplied him. He started his sermon about a real man again, and the universe did us the kindness of timing. Evan rounded the corner, Noah's small hand tucked in his. Evan's smile was easy and cool. "A real man knows when to take out the garbage," he said, not raising his voice, not needing to. For a brittle second, I thought my father might swing. He didn't. He muttered something soft and sour and turned. My mother sent Evan a look with sharpened edges, then followed, gathering her purse like she couldn't stand the thought that it had touched our air. The attorney backed toward his car with the careful steps of a man leaving a porch where the dog has teeth. Olivia stayed long enough to try one last line. "You're going to throw away your real family for him? For some nobody?" "You made yourself a nobody the day I only mattered when I wrote checks," I said, not unkindly. "Good luck finding another sponsor for your handbags." Evan half snorted, half coughed. Olivia flushed, then fled. We walked back to the backyard. Noah asked if bad people always drive loud. "Sometimes," Evan said, lifting him onto the platform. We set a beam, hammered slow. Somewhere in the middle of that rhythm, a realization arrived and sat down beside me. It didn't hurt anymore. I wasn't numb. I wasn't boiling. I was simply uninterested in bleeding. A week passed like a clean page. Not a single call. The realtor called instead with a congratulations that sounded like a bell. We signed for the new house with hands that didn't shake. We ate takeout on the floor and laughed about how the previous owner had hidden a mural of sunflowers behind a bookshelf. For a breathless hour, I believed the story might be over. Then a letter arrived. Not from them, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. The envelope had a weight to it that made my stomach drop before I even slid it open. Inside was a copy of a loan agreement. 6 months old, large, co-signed by me. The signature looked like mine until you set it beside the one I'd just written on the house papers. I called the number at the bottom. The conversation was brief, clinical, devastating. The bank had already begun collection after default. My parents had listed me as co-signer. My signature was a perfect fiction. When I told Evan I expected heat, he gave me steel. He put his palm over mine and said, "Good. Now we bury it properly." I hired a forensic document examiner the next morning. By Thursday, the report was conclusive: forgery. My attorney filed criminal charges before the weekend could pretend to be a refuge. This wasn't another door slam. This was the lock changing. The arrest came faster than I imagined. Fraud cases usually drag through paperwork like molasses, but this time the gears of justice caught fire. Maybe it was the evidence. Black and white reports from the examiner, crisp receipts, emails with timestamps no one could wiggle out of. Maybe it was the brazenness of the forgery itself, or maybe it was simply time. I got the call from my lawyer on a Wednesday morning. "They're executing the warrant today," he said. His voice was clipped, steady, the tone of someone who had seen enough cases collapse to know this one would not. I hung up, stared at the kitchen wall, and let my breath return. Evan walked in, coffee in hand, saw my face, and didn't need to ask. He set the mug down, pulled me against his chest, and whispered, "It's ending." By noon, my phone buzzed with the first text from Rachel, a cousin who lived near my parents. "They're outside. Police cars. Neighbors watching." 10 minutes later, another. "Your mom fainted on the lawn. Your dad's in cuffs." I sat on the couch, Noah building towers of blocks beside me, and felt the world tilt, not with shock, but with inevitability. It hit the local news that evening. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the TV. "Respected community couple arrested in forgery scheme." There were photos, my father in handcuffs, my mother pale and furious, Olivia screaming as if outrage could undo handprints on a police uniform. Evan and I ate popcorn while the anchor read the details. $80,000 in forged loans. Criminal fraud. The words sounded too big for the living room, but Noah laughed at his cartoon in the next room, grounding me in the small, safe present. The fallout came like dominoes. My parents' house went into foreclosure within weeks. Olivia's college revoked her financial aid, the stain of fraud bleeding through every file. Friends who had once called me ungrateful son, no, ungrateful daughter now, avoided my eyes in the grocery store. Their whispers dried in their throats when they saw me. The story had done what I never could, made the truth undeniable. 1 month later, we moved into the new house. Bigger yard, brighter rooms, the kind of place where Noah could paint the walls with his imagination, and Evan could finally build the music studio he'd been sketching in the margins of our lives. For the first time in years, the air felt clean. My shoulders, which had carried generations of excuses, finally lowered. That's when I found the note, taped to the new mailbox, handwritten in my mother's script. 3 words only. We're sorry. No signature, no explanation, no promise. Just a scrap of paper that might have been a confession, or a manipulation, or both. I didn't bring it inside. I burned it in the fire pit that night, while Noah roasted marshmallows and Evan tuned his guitar. I watched the flames lick away the ink until it was nothing but smoke. Summer unfolded gently. We built Noah's treehouse, hung a tire swing, even booked flights to Europe, an actual family trip of our own, no shadows lurking. I almost believed it was over. I stopped dreaming about knocks at the door. I stopped rehearsing confrontations in my head. I even stopped bracing when the phone rang. But endings have a way of disguising themselves as beginnings. One morning, Evan sifted through the mail while I fried eggs. He paused, brows furrowed, and slid an envelope across the counter, no return address. Addressed not to me, but to him. Inside was a letter, neatly written, every line a performance, from Olivia. She had served 6 months, probation, community service, a humiliating mark she couldn't wash off. The letter wasn't quite apology and not quite plea. Instead, it was an offer. She claimed our parents were already plotting something new, that they had turned on her, trying to pin the entire fraud on her shoulders, that they were talking about leaving the state under new names, starting fresh where no one knew them. She said she had proof, bank statements, digital backups, records tucked away where no one could reach, and she'd give them up, but only to Evan. The last line was the sharpest cut. You married the wrong person, but he married the right one. Evan read it twice, jaw tight, then folded it neatly and slid it across the table to me. I scanned it, the words crawling like insects across the page. For a moment, I felt my stomach churn, not from the letter itself, but from the intention behind it. Olivia hadn't reached out to me. She tried to wedge herself into the smallest crack she thought existed between Evan and me. Evan broke the silence. She wants attention. Let her rot in silence. His voice was steady, final. I nodded. But when he left the room, I slipped the letter into a manila envelope. Later that afternoon, I sent it to my lawyer, not as a response, not as a concession, just as insurance. Because if there's one thing my family taught me, it's that endings are never clean. They come back with new disguises, new tricks, new claws. That night, when Noah was asleep and the house hummed with quiet, I sat with Evan on the porch. We didn't talk about the letter. We talked about Europe, about how Noah wanted to see castles, about how Evan wanted to play guitar in a Spanish plaza, about how I wanted to walk a street where no one knew my name. The stars blinked overhead, sharp and clear. For the first time in 30 years, I let myself believe that my life was mine.